no matter how much money somebody has, no matter how, intellectually tuned into this financial planning process that we think they might be, unless we tell them like what the next steps are, they probably aren't going to take them. And so the phrase that we use to remind ourselves and to remind others is that when clients see a lot, they do a little. And when clients see a little, they do a lot.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. Really excited for our guest here today. And this is just another example of an advisor in our community who's listened to our show for quite a bit and then had the confidence in reaching out and volunteering to be a guest. And I'm really excited for this show. I'll go through some topics here in a moment, but just wanted to briefly say that if anyone who's listening to this show feels as if you have a great value proposition and you are a differentiator in the marketplace, shoot me an email at david@modelfa.com. More than happy to have an intro conversation, see if it's a good fit to have you on the show. So really appreciative for our guest today, Nic Nielsen, for being proactive and reaching out. Nic is the co-founder of Know My Plan. He's also the author of Visual Finance. And really what he specializes in is guiding sales executives and their families who are usually in their 40s or so. And he does so through delivering a one-page financial plan known as the Financial Fortress Blueprint. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about that one-page financial plan. We're going to be talking about how to position planning to sales executives, which can be challenging because, income is variable and it can be tough to sort of plan around that sort of unplanned income, if you will. While also, we're going to hit on the topic of creating content. So our 100th episode that we had with Amy, Frank, and Alan, we talked a lot about social media and the impact that it's had on their business. And in Nic's business, a lot of his clients come from the content that he does create on LinkedIn. So with that being said, Nic, welcome to the show.
David, thank you so much for having me. I have listened to all of your podcasts and I'm a huge fan of the work that you're doing at the Model FA.
Appreciate your time and attention. And hopefully there's been some nuggets that you've been able to implement in your business through all that content that you've consumed.
Absolutely. You just surround yourself with A-listers who have great ideas.
Love it. So give us a sense, Nic, how'd you get started in the business? I'm always curious to hear, someone's journey before we get into the meat of the topics that we'll be discussing today.
Yeah, so I always loved math. I was a chemical engineering major in college and just geeked out on the math, loved all my calculus classes, but was just bored to death in the labs. And kind of through divine intervention at that time, my grandfather had asked me to review some of his investment statements. He had no more than an 8th grade education, and he had saved a lot of money. He was a welder for Texaco and had saved quite well, but he just didn't understand his investments. And it really gave me an opportunity to learn about investments, take a deep dive in them to try to understand, what he owned and kind of where it fit into his financial picture. The advice that he gave me is that, hey, Nic, if you understand how money works, you're going to be able to take care of your family. You'll probably always have a job, but most importantly, you'll be able to help other people. That kind of gave me the spark that I wanted to pursue financial planning. It was a long journey to get there. Started off as a bank teller after I graduated college, not exactly what I had envisioned when I, started down the path of being a chemical engineer. But, through a lot of hard knocks and a lot of time as a teller, here I am today.
I remember back in college, I went to Bryant University in Rhode Island. And when we came across calculus as one of the required classes that we had to take, when they introduced funny little symbols, it was totally over my head. I dropped the class and I took it at a community college to get the credit over one summer. And so I give you a lot of credit for what seems to be an enjoyment for calculus.
No, calculus was great. Even after I switched my major from chemical engineering to business, I was trying to take Calc 3 and differential equations as electives. Really, the first time I fell in love with school. I always liked school. Both my parents were teachers. But first time in senior year of high school, and I got introduced to Calc 1. It was like love at first sight. It's like, where has this been all my life? So I've always felt very blessed with mathematics. Hardly leave the house without my HP 12C financial planning calculator. It's just an irrational love of math.
Well, something that I cannot relate to, but I'm sure we can relate to some of the topics that we have identified here to discuss. When you got into financial planning. So you mentioned that you started, as a bank teller as your first introduction to the industry. And now you have, your own practice that you founded. How was that transition? Like, was it a bank teller to financial planning, or what were the steps in between?
Yeah, so I spent a long time as a licensed banker and just having a lot of conversations with everybody that came into, a retail branch, everything from, helping young people open up their first checking accounts to, an older person with CDs and everything in between. But I had the incredible fortune of getting to work with a lot of really good retail banking financial advisors and getting to sit in those appointments. And I was the one, for the most part, setting those appointments with people saying, hey, my financial advisory partner, I think would be a wonderful person for us to sit down and meet with together. I was just really blessed to have been nurtured in a very positive way in the bank channel. I had a branch manager who really poured into me. She really didn't like meeting with clients, but she really enjoyed coaching people. And I was just very blessed that every conversation that I had, her office had like this little sliding window that she would open up and she could hear literally every one of my conversations. At the time, I hated it because we would debrief after every conversation. Like, hey, you missed this. You didn't ask this. Did you see how Mrs. Burns looked when you said this? But it was just, 15 conversations a day with people walking into the bank branch, getting 15 coaching sessions every day. And I just got so many more at bats than most young financial planners would ever get.
And then, so what was the transition from the bank channel to the independent space?
Yeah, so I transitioned from that licensed banker to the financial advisory role. So I was in a bank branch for about 5 years, and then met my business partner, Jeff Walters, in the banking channel. And we decided that we were going to go out together, form our own company, Know My Plan, about 5 years ago. And it's been a real blessing. Our clients followed us. We wanted to be able to work with who we wanted to work with. We never wanted to be in a situation where a client had too much money for us to work with or didn't have enough money for us to work with. And then we wanted to control how we marketed. It's been fantastic, really, from day one.
Yeah, I feel like there's a number of reasons why people will either transition from the bank channel to the independent space or a broker dealer to the independent space. But one of the main themes I hear a lot, which we'll talk about later on in the podcast, is just being able to market like it's 2022 and not like, the old days, so to speak. But where I want to get started is this idea of a one-page financial plan. And I want to kind of give some backdrop and context. So with a couple of our larger clients that we work with, I'm helping them refine their strategy meeting sort of language, if you will. So for context, typically they do a discovery meeting, strategy meeting, depending on how that goes. Then they, have the implementation meeting. And so a lot of what we're doing is role play work where I pretend to be the client and, they're obviously the advisor and they're presenting to me. Now, in full disclosure, the way that I'm wired is more kind of high level and conceptual in nature. I don't like to nerd out in the numbers and things like that. And I found myself as they were presenting, like I was kind of glazing over, like almost uninterested and disengaged because it's just not how I learn. And there's certainly people, that have more of that engineer style mindset that want to know all the details. And it's interesting to me how someone that I would assume based on your background and interest in calculus and chemical engineering that you are very analytical. So it's surprising to me that you've gone the way of simplification with presenting a financial plan. So you have this concept and this deliverable, so to speak, of a one-page financial plan. I'm just going to start off with a broad question and kind of pick at it from there. How'd this come about and, what does it actually look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the origin, it started in the bank channel, and I was partnered with the wealth management group, and they had a client who paid a large retainer fee by my scales, $50,000 a year retaining client. And they had said, hey, this guy's been with us forever. He's never done anything that we've ever said, but he pays us the $50,000 retainer fee every year. So I said, hey, in the meeting, do you mind if I ask him a question? And they're like, yeah, sure. You can ask him some questions. Just whatever you do, don't lose the retainer deal. So basically at the end of the conversation, I said, David, we really enjoy doing this work and, we find it very valuable, but I have to admit, I find it odd that you've never actually implemented any of the strategies that have been laid out in this financial plan. It was a big leather-bound book with 25 tabs. And he said, Nick, I get home and I look at it and I don't even know where to start. And I said, well, David, would it make sense for you if I could just simplify this down into like a 1 page just of the next steps that you need to take today? He's like, yeah, that sounds great. How much more does that cost? So that was like the aha moment for me, is that no matter how much money somebody has, no matter how, intellectually tuned into this financial planning process that we think they might be, unless we tell them like what the next steps are, they probably aren't going to take them. And so the phrase that we use to remind ourselves and to remind others is that when clients see a lot, they do a little. And when clients see a little, they do a lot. So within our 1 page financial plan, we call it the Financial Fortress Blueprint, because you always have to be marketing, right? It's basically broken into 3 different sections. The first section is kind of your dreams. Like, if we've heard you right, these are the things that we think that are important to you. This is what we're really trying to solve for if we do the financial planning process correctly. The second section is just kind of a visual representation of the balance sheet. And we just kind of like to break it down that way in a visual format. It's how we present. It's very consistent. And the third format is really just the simple and concise next steps. And many times it's just 2 or 3 action items between now and the next time that we agree to meet. It's my job to nerd out on all the math. It's my job to nerd out and figure out how much, life insurance someone needs or how much disability insurance they need. I don't need to show them how all those things were calculated unless they ask me. If I tell them they need $1.2 million in a 20-year term life insurance policy, for most people, that's good enough. But if they say, well, hey, Nick, how did you calculate that? I'm glad to show them at that point, but I'm not going to inundate them with mathematics unless they ask me to.
So one of the suggestions that I have for advisors is in the initial discovery meeting where they're getting to know the client, and the kind of saying that I kind of use as the example is essentially asking the client if they're analytical or conceptual. But the way that, I used to ask that is, hey, are you the type of person that just wants to know what time it is? Or are you curious to know like how the watch actually works? And that kind of dictates in your future meetings to what level of detail the client wants to go into, or if they want to kind of just stay high level and, hey, just give me the answers. Don't give me how you solve the problem. So I'm curious to know, do you always lead? And I know that you put a lot of marketing behind the idea of the 1-page financial plan. So do you always like lead with that? Or do you kind of get clarification on the front end so that kind of how to present to where the information will be received best? How do you approach that?
We always lead with it. And we always tell people, if you need more information, let me know. But some of this, we're figuring out like how much we need to save every month, how much we need in life insurance. Those are things that we can whiteboard out together. And we do that, 95% of our meetings are Zoom. So I'm sharing my whiteboard. We're working out the math together, and I'm showing them pictorially because I can do it really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not overly complex. I kind of come from the Nick Murray school of, how you solve for how much you need in retirement. Then we have a similar process for life insurance. And then they can see, okay, I'm willing to accept these assumptions that Nick gave me if we want to. And they might say, well, hey, what happened if I got a 6% return versus an 8% return? That changes how much we have to save per month. That's the number. But at the end of the day, the simple and concise next steps of the financial plan is simple things like, max out Roth 401k. We're going to save $850 per month in a joint brokerage account in our 100% equity model. We're going to save $440 every month into the 529 plan. It's just raw dollars and what allocations it goes into.
And you may not know an exact figure, so I'm more so looking for a gut check, or maybe you do have an exact figure. What percentage of the time are clients cool with the 1-page financial plan as opposed to, wanting to kind of see the longer format of how you arrived at the numbers beyond just the kind of whiteboarding it out?
Yeah. So 99.5%, because I can tell you we have approximately 200 households and we have one family that wants to go really deep in the weeds. And people self-select out, right? If they don't like the process, right? That's part of the beauty of LinkedIn, just marketing in general, is that when you put out to the world kind of how you do things, what your process is, and people raise their hand and say, hey, I really like this. People that you're attracting are already kind of self-selecting, like, hey, this is my style. And people that are more of the engineering mindset, they'd be like, I don't want a 1-page plan. I need all 300 pages. They're not raising their hands to meet with me in the first place.
Now, do you like, let's say, and I know it's not a huge percentage at all because of the fact that you're kind of qualifying them in or out through your content in advance. But let's say someone is looking for detail in the moment, like in the meeting. Do you have that longer form financial plan like ready to go, or do you go through that in a separate meeting? I guess my question is more so like, are you doing kind of all the detailed work and then summarizing it, or are you just starting with the summary and then have to go back to all the detailed work if they do want to go down that path?
Probably depends on exactly what the question is, right? So we're still using like Right Capital for financial planning. Depends upon the question. It might be like, hey, let's go into to Right Capital together. We haven't modeled what that Roth conversion would look like, but let's work through that together. And those are things that are pretty easy to work with in real time. Depending on the question, that could be, setting up a follow-up meeting if the work hasn't been done.
As I was going through those role plays, and I don't say this to throw shade at any of the advisors that I'm working with on that, but the stuff that they go through, by and large, can be considered irrelevant. Just the level of detail that has kind of no correlation to the end recommendation can just be nauseating sometimes. And like I said, it caused me, and I would imagine other folks, to glaze over. So what does your process look like then? Is it discovery meeting, 1-page financial plan in a second meeting, and then yes or no? Because the assumption that I would make is a lot of times people drag their feet when they experience paralysis by analysis, like that $50,000 retainer client that you mentioned. So I would imagine that people are quick to make a decision on moving forward or not.
Yeah, I would say most of the time people have made that decision in the first appointment with us. And a lot of times, people are reaching out on LinkedIn saying like, I'd love to work with you type of thing. So in that first appointment, you're really seeing if you want to work with them more so than the other way around. But we call our process diem, like carpe diem, seize the day. The D is the discovery. I is for the ideas. E is for execute, and M is for monitor. So everybody has a different acronym. The process kind of looks the same, right? So in that first meeting, we're just really getting to know them just to kind of make sure it would be a good fit and just kind of their past experience with, have you worked with a financial planner before? Why did you leave that financial planner? You're just looking for the red flags of why they may not be a good fit. And I will say most of the people that come to us are DIYers, which we think is wonderful because they don't have a lot of preconceptions or misconceptions of what it is to work with a financial planner or what a financial planner does. So these are higher net worth people who have been DIYers that have reached some complexity point in their life, that have raised their hand and said, like, I've gone as far as I feel that I can comfortably do this on my own without making the big mistake.
Cool. So we've alluded to it a couple times. So I want to transition over in this direction. You mentioned that a lot of the folks that you work with now came from LinkedIn. And one of the things I really like and I try and help advisors with is the idea that when you put out content, you put a flag in the ground, so to speak, and put yourself out there as, hey, this is what we are and this is what we're not, and kind of take that, strong stance. It gives people the opportunity to get to know you from afar. And like you mentioned, and I find this too in our business, especially with the podcast and all the episodes that we put out, is when someone eventually comes to us, we have to royally mess up that phone call for them to not become a client. Because why would they reach out having listened to a handful of podcasts if they weren't ready to go? So I feel like it shortens the sales process quite a bit. So my question to kick off this topic is, when did you first start creating content?
So it was pre-pandemic. We had dabbled, tried some different things, used some different companies. Nothing had really started to hit. I started trying to do these 3,000 word blogs for SEO because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. And my mom is a retired English teacher, and I would send it to my mom to kind of proofread it and stuff. And I was like, hey, Mom, what'd you think? Was it good? My mom was like, Nick, not so good. She's like, this was really hard to read. Is there any way that you can make it shorter? I'm like, yeah, I can cut out some stuff. We'll tweak it up. Let me send it back to you. So I'd send it back to her. It's 1,200 words. And I'm like, it's 1,200, but it's still good. What do you think, Mom? This is long, this is painful. You got to make this shorter. Nobody's going to get through this. After several permutations through that, that went back to, she's like, Nick, I don't know what you do. Can you do this in like a couple bullet points? And I was like, I can draw a picture and I can give you like 3 bullet points. She's like, well, you got to try something because nobody's ever going to read the long stuff. And so that kind of was the origin of drawing some sketches around a financial planning topic or a question that I had been asked, and then just some simple, context, 2 or 3 bullet points around it. And I had done that for a couple of weeks. I'm like, I don't know, maybe this will work. My business partner thought it was kind of cool. He thought it was authentic. We both thought it was authentic because that's how we present in meetings. We were always drawing pictures, both of us, kind of like, storytelling. And then like 2 weeks into this, pretty attractive lady sent me a message and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in becoming a client. I have some money that I'd love for you to invest." And I sent it over to my business partner, Jeff. He's like, "Yeah," he's like, "There's no way this is real. This is, probably getting catfished at best." And so I was like, "Well, I mean, we got to try. She might be real." And she was. And she became our first client that we had gotten through LinkedIn. I'm like, "This is great. She's wonderful. She's super nice. She has this money. She's a sales executive. This is perfect." From there, it just kind of like snowballed. It was just people continued to just raising their hand and raising their hand. And it's been life changing, from a business standpoint. It's been transformational.
And you brought up an interesting point. Essentially, what you were getting at with the sketches is, and I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to connect with Nic on LinkedIn, and that link will be in the show notes. And the spelling of his name, if you want to go there directly, is Nic and then Nielsen, Nielsen. The infographics, I mean, they stand out, which is interesting because they're so simple. And I don't say that to diminish the content at all, but it's
the greatest compliment you can give, David. I love that.
It makes it so easy to understand the point that you're trying to make. And the point that I want to make with that is sometimes people lean into infographics. Sometimes they lean into a podcast. Sometimes they lean into videos. Sometimes they lean into blogs, right? So it's figuring out kind of what gives you energy and just leaning into that. And then from there, you can create other forms of content on that. So like one of my former coaching clients, Justin Goodbread, he's become a top selling author. And how his books were constructed was through all the videos and podcasts that he's done that then were transcribed and turned into blogs. And then those blogs were turned into the book. So the more content that you do, regardless of the format, it can kind of spider off into, different formats as well, because I also think it's important outside of what gives you energy in terms of content creation. It's also important to, I think, meet prospects where they're at. And some people like to watch videos. Some people like to see little quick hit infographics. Some people like to read. So that diversification of content, I think, is important over time. But I also think it's important to just start somewhere. How often are you posting content? Is it every day? Is it once a week? Like, what's kind of the cadence that you found to work well for you?
Yeah, so definitely Monday through Friday, I'm posting on LinkedIn every day, at least once. And Friday mornings, we send out an email to our clients and it'll have an embedded YouTube video. So that's kind of what we do from a content creation standpoint. The email, like most things, started monthly. I'm like, okay, we got really good feedback when we did it monthly. So that kind of charged me up. I'm like, well, let's do it every 2 weeks. Then I got more feedback from it. More clients would say, hey, like, I just thought of my friend Tim. You should meet Tim. He was talking to me about 529s, whatever the case might be. So I'm like, all right, let's go to every week. So now we're at every week. I hope it doesn't go to daily because that seems like a lot of work. But every week has worked really, really well. Every step along the way, it's like, all right, make it simpler, make it shorter, reduce fluff, just like straight to it, short and sweet. And then usually the YouTube video that I attach to it, 2 minutes or less. And, people are embracing it. And as long as people seem to enjoy it, we're going to keep doing it and just try to keep evolving the process.
Do you have a podcast yet?
No podcast. I'm just fortunate enough to be on this with you.
So I'm just trying to word this in such a way that's motivating for you and not like patronizing at all, but you have a very calming voice and like easygoing demeanor. I think you would crush a podcast. So just kind of pseudo coaching or consulting in the moment. I think it would be cool, especially with, and we'll transition over this topic in a moment, but with the client base that you have build with sales executives, I'm a big believer in one of the ways that you can grow a business is by adding value outside of the scope of what you're actually compensated to do. And I'm willing to bet that you have some badass sales professionals that you work with So hosting a podcast interview style where you have sales folks on the show sharing different sales ideas and experiences that can be shared out to other sales professionals as a way to help them in earning more money, get to know you, and being able to put out information outside of financial planning topics. Personally, I think that would be an excellent evolution for you as you continue to build out your content, strategy and game plan.
I think it is the simple and concise next step that a one-page plan would follow, David.
There you go. Well, I will look out for your podcast in the coming months.
Yeah, and I'll look out for your invoice.
And this one's on the house. So it seems like you had a quick win in terms of starting to post content. And not everyone has that quick win. And I feel like when they don't get that quick win, it can be discouraging. So I'm curious to know, if I were to bet, I would bet that as you started to put out content, sure, you had that quick win with that woman who reached out. I would imagine that in the early stages, your lead flow was kind of spotty, but through consistency, I'm sure it's become a little bit more predictable. So in the early stages of creating content, if you can remember back to that point, how many leads would you get, whatever, on a monthly basis, weekly basis? And then how has that changed to now?
Yeah, so it has definitely made it more predictable. I would say at the beginning, you were getting like one lead a month, one lead every 6 weeks, but you were still thankful for it. And it was great because you're like, hey, this is good stuff. It's really, by putting your thoughts on paper like that, it's really making you a better advisor. And it's kind of like, it's very introspective. And I think I was kind of sharpening my saw along the process, even if I didn't get clients. So I think that was important. I knew that I was growing from it. Where today that's probably one or two a week. So I still think of it as like turning on the spigot, right? It's still a drip. It's not an avalanche by any stretch of the imagination. I'd love to get to the point where instead of one or two a week, it was 10 a week. And I think that it's possible because I think that there are, thousands of people out there who want advice and guidance, who want help. It's just a matter of identifying them and attracting them to what you are doing. And the thing like the podcast of interviewing other incredible sales executives is a great way to get in front of other awesome sales executives. But still, at one or two a week, 50 to 100 new introductions a year to really good people who are interested in you is transformational to your business.
And that doesn't even include, I'm sure, well, I hope at least, that you're not fully reliant on lead flow from social media, but it's also client referrals and CLYs and like other things like that. But it's a great supplement to the business. It's also a great way for a client to introduce a friend to you through the content. It's lower friction. It's not sort of like high pressure or anything like that. So social media, if executed appropriately, can really serve as kind of a Swiss Army knife for, prospecting, lead flow, adding value, folks getting to know you from afar, staying relevant in between your reviews with folks so that if there's a situation to where someone in their world needs an advisor, you're top of mind because you're popping up every day. One more question I have on LinkedIn. So if someone, has a LinkedIn, they got 100, 200 connections or something like that, and they're posting content every day, like that's only going to stretch so far based on the network that you have. So were you proactively like searching for sales folks, your niche, which we'll go to in a moment? Were you proactively seeking them out and sending connection requests, or how are you making sure that your content, is actually being seen?
Yeah. So I believe the number is 125 connection requests that you can send out per week on LinkedIn. So I'm trying to take advantage of that. I send a very simple request that says, hey, I'm a financial planner that loves working with sales executives. I try to post fun and engaging financial planning content. I'd love to include you in my network. Love, Nick. Right? That's my little love letter. And they either accept or they don't. Either way is fine.
Yeah. And
enough people kind of enter the feed and that they start to see it. And I've had people who have referred me their friends who aren't even clients. Like, so-and-so referred me to you. I haven't even met that person. Like, I'm connected with them. I haven't met them I haven't had a conversation with them, but what a great compliment. Maybe they're not ready to be a client, but they referred someone who became a client. So the power of LinkedIn is incredible. So many people that have kind of raised their hand and reached out to me were second connection requests. These are people I'm not even connected with. but you're entering their world just from the fact that they're connected to someone that you're connected with. So I do try to use those 125 weekly connections every week. There's no shortage of sales executives that are on LinkedIn.
For sure. Yeah. And what's cool about, well, I'll get to that in a second, but when I first left being an advisor and got into the consulting space before merging with Model FA, I remember I stretched that 125 kind of loose rule, for connection requests on a weekly basis. And I was doing like 400 a day. So don't do that, because I was in LinkedIn jail for about 2.5 years. I just got let out about 6 months ago, where in order to connect with someone from me to them, I needed to know the email address that they set their LinkedIn up with. So definitely heed the warnings when those messages come up if you're, firing those out. Otherwise, it's not good news. But the other benefit with sales professionals, and we'll get on this topic now, is they're active on LinkedIn. Like, they use LinkedIn a lot of times for their own personal prospecting. So earlier I alluded to, in terms of the forms of content to kind of meet them where they're at, that goes with the platform too. So like retirees, as an example, it probably doesn't make sense to put your content on LinkedIn. It makes sense to maybe put it on Facebook, right? Or again, wherever they're at.
Yes.
Did you intentionally go after building your business around sales executives, or was it more kind of like serendipitous?
Absolutely serendipitous. So when we were at the bank, we had a ton of nurse clients. And so we started like, hey, we're going to do this with nurses. And then the pandemic hit. Couldn't talk to any nurses. You still probably can't, really, for the most part. But then the people that were attracted to the content were all sales executives. We're like, wait a second. It's the sales executives that are here. Not that anybody gets on LinkedIn thinking, man, I could sure use a financial planner today. I sure hope there's a financial planner out there that sends me a DM.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes they stop and be like, oh, that's different. That's neat. Like, you stop the scroll for 30 seconds and they look at what you've done. And, by the fact that maybe you've stopped their scroll, then the next time you post, you're higher up on their page and they're like, oh, okay, I remember this guy. And whenever they have some sort of life event, they change jobs, they inherit money, whatever the case is, you just kind of want to be in the mix. You want to be one of those top 2 or 3 people that they think of that might be able to, help guide them when they're ready.
And I would imagine, and I'm being incredibly general with this comment, but sales folks are probably one of the biggest groups of people that appreciate the simplicity of a one-page financial plan. And they probably, I would imagine some of them, and you've probably gotten these comments, and the simplicity that you're putting in front of them, and they probably try and replicate that in their sales process as well, seeing how effective that is and how well received they're receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sales professionals, more so than any other, one, you don't have to worry about like having, like, they know that you have a process. Mm-hmm. So it's a more genuine conversation. It's very authentic between a financial planner and a salesperson. Like, I feel it's just natural. It flows very easily. And they have processes themselves. They're just not out there winging it. Some of this medical device sales stuff is incredibly complicated. I can't believe all this stuff that they're doing. They have a very defined process, but they need that simplicity because most of these people have families and they're very, very busy and they're working very, very hard. They don't have time for a lot of fluff. They're just, hey, get to it. What are the next steps? What do I need to be doing? Am I okay? If I'm not okay, what do I need to do differently? Boom, boom, boom.
How are you solving the challenge of inconsistent incomes, dry periods, big pops, and because a lot of these folks probably have a small or kind of basic salary to where they can pay their basic bills, and then the lion's share of their income, if they're good anyways, is coming from their variable comp. So how are you kind of solving that challenge? Because planning can be tough with those people based on the sporadic nature of how their income is earned.
Yeah. And you really have, I would say, 3 groups of people. One are the people that get paid, commissions monthly or quarterly. Those are a lot easier to smooth out. And we just, kind of my process is you take your trailing 12 commissions, divide that by 12. That kind of gives you a monthly run rate. Those people generally need a little bit more emergency funds if it's, higher variability in the incomes. The people that are very hard to plan for are the people who get a one-time bonus per year on a lower salary. And that bonus is highly variable. And no one understands what the algorithm is, where the the company controls those variables. Those people are very difficult to plan for. I mean, it is tough. And then the third group of people is the RSU ISO camp, which is a little bit easier to plan for because of the known, we know what the company stock price is if it's publicly traded. So, the RSU ISO camp, there's complexity there, but it's easier. I will say that group, and one of the beauties of LinkedIn is that beauty that's getting that annual bonus with the highly company controlled variables. That entire group is on LinkedIn every day looking for another job. And that's one of these salespeople. It's an arms race for the best salespeople in America and the world. And they're on LinkedIn always trying to find the next best job. So that is one of the great, I think, keys within what we're doing is our people are really on LinkedIn.
And there's a lot of, based on that, a lot of money in motion.
Absolutely. Yeah. With the annual bonuses, quarterly bonuses, RSUs vesting, there's complexity. And I always think one of the things that, for me to add value to people, there needs to be some level of complexity. And it charges me up as an advisor. I enjoy that. I don't want to be bored by someone's financial plan. There's some complexity there, and that excites me. I think people, will see that excitement when I go through their plan and, hey, this is how we could do it. What do you think? Then I'll always get their input, right? It's not my way or the highway, and there's no one way to do, a financial plan. The best financial plan is the one that somebody can stick to and implement.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been awesome. I think there's a lot of excellent takeaways from this. I think I try and share this in every episode, but don't just listen to this episode, please. Do something with what you learned and implement it. And I do want to pivot. So if you're listening to this show and it happens to be your first episode, one of the things that I ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. And it's my way of kind of distilling a reading list for everyone who's listening. And we got a new book recommendation every podcast. So it's 52 books a year. I try my best to keep up with reading or listening to the books that I have not yet consumed. And they have a big impact. So the book that you chose happens to be one that I love. And I've read it a couple times. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, who is just a badass. But explain to me kind of the impact that it's had on you or your business, life in general. Why should someone pick that up and read it?
Yeah. So I think, as a financial planner and trying to relate to our good people in the armed forces, I love the fact how they're so processed, right? They have processes for everything, but they're also willing to adapt when things change. And it's all about pushing forward and getting better. And, Jocko certainly has a nonsense mentality. And, sometimes people become clients, sometimes they don't. A lot of times when they don't, maybe that's a good thing. But sometimes, hey, I got to take extreme ownership on, what I didn't do. What do I need to do to get better? What do I need to do to communicate more clearly? Because if I communicate more clearly, I help more people. But my favorite part of the book was when he explains, they're getting ready to do this move through Iraq, I believe. And he talked about simple is safe, complex gets people killed. And that's my goal really as a financial planner, is that I have to communicate things in a simple enough way to where people can move forward and take action. Because the best plan that doesn't get implemented helps no one. So that's why we do the one-page plan, so we can give people simple, clear and concise next steps so they can move forward. They can make the next step towards progress for them and their plan.
I'm glad that you tied the book into what you're doing right now. It's an excellent example of consuming something, implementing it, and actually having an impact on not just your business, but all the people that you're serving. So I'm glad that you kind of tied that together. And then you also have a book. I read it in the bio. I see it in the background. It's called Visual Finance. Is that meant to be client facing? Can advisors benefit from that too? Tell me about the book that you put together.
Yeah, so a lot of my advisor friends really like it. So it's 40 sketches that I put together that I think are kind of impactful from a financial planning standpoint. So the book is 40 sketches. On each page, there's a QR code. And if you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a YouTube video where I'm talking about a practical financial planning application of that sketch. The videos are really short in nature. They're 90 seconds to 2 minutes, but it's everything from Roth conversions to how much life insurance do I need, just perspective on investing, long-term, equity-driven mindset. People have really enjoyed it, and I feel it's a heck of a lot nicer than handing someone a business card.
Yeah, and it doesn't end up in the trash or end up in the stack of business cards that never gets looked at again.
Something to differentiate you from the sea of sameness, right?
Love it. Well, Nic, this has been fantastic. And for those of you who are listening, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. Definitely an episode worth sharing. And you also mentioned that you'd be open and willing to share an example of that one-page financial plan so that advisors have context. How do they get that example?
Yeah, if they want that example, they can drop me a DM on LinkedIn. That would be fine. Feel free to email me as well, Nic, at knowmyplan.com. Either way, if anyone's interested, reach out to me. Glad to share that with anyone in your community.
Cool. And with that being said, I appreciate everyone's time and attention in listening to this episode. One quick ask that I have, and I'm willing to reciprocate as well. If you would be so kind as to leave us a review on the show, really helps with getting additional exposure and ears on the podcast within the advisor community. Feel free to share this episode as well. And if you take a screenshot of that review once it posts and just shoot me an email at david@modelfa.com, as a thank you, I will buy one of Nic's books for you for doing so. And I actually just went on Amazon and bought it myself. So I'm excited to check it out. So, Nic, I appreciate you being on the show. Everyone listening, I appreciate your time. Go ahead, leave a review, and appreciate you joining today, man.
Yeah, thank you, David.